Okay, it looks like we are live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's special board meeting to approve the audit. We greatly appreciate everybody's time, making sure we can get this in before the deadline. And Stephen, for your time, I'm sure it took a lot of time over break to get this all ready. So appreciate everybody's time this morning. To start with, we just need to approve the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I approve the agenda, Jen.
A motion to approve. Thank you, Jen. And do we have a second?
Sorry, second, Michelle.
Awesome. And Michelle, are you able to take minutes or do you need me to do so?
Yes, nope, I'm at the desk now.
Okay, awesome. And so Marvin is trying to join, but it has not gone through. So right now we just have 4. So give me just a second. So let me check on him.
And I'm going to switch and join from my laptop. So
Okay.
Let me in when you see that.
Sorry for the delay here. We're moving in the wrong direction. There is Michelle. Sorry for the delay here. I guess we don't have to vote for a little bit. So in the interest of time, I might say let's go ahead. Marvin is trying to get back in. I'm going to give him the phone number so he can call in. Oh, there he is. So Stephen, you can go ahead.
All right. Thank you again for meeting this morning. We do have quite a few things here to unpack. So if you have here the packet that was sent out, the audit report final is what we're looking at first. And so there's quite a few things that are held within that document. Main thing is the audit report and the set of financials. And then they also include supplementary information, which has additional financial statements, which breaks down the school and then our SPE real estate entity. But then we also have a state compliance section as well as the federal compliance section. And so throughout this, I do want to cover the things that are listed here on screen, the financial results for last year, as well as the auditor's opinions, highlights of those audited set of financial statements. Note that we had no findings, which is a good thing. And then we'll talk about fund balance, where we're at, reserve ratio, and then we'll ask for a motion to approve the audit. So if you would advance to the next slide for me. All right, so just continuing with that same document within the financial packet there, the audit packet, audit report final. The auditors, they issue an opinion about the actual audit. And so in their opinion, the statements, the financial statements, the consolidated financial statements were presented fairly. They're on the modified cash basis. They believe that the audit evidence that they obtained was sufficient and appropriate. And so it's a good audit. And so there's several other items within the report. They talk about, we just talked about the opinion, but they also talk about the emphasis of the financial statement basis, and we are on modified cash basis. And so they want to draw the reader's attention to that it's modified cash basis, which is not a generally accepted basis, but that's fine for what we have going on. It's not out of the ordinary to have modified cash basis. It's just not GAAP. And then they also, in their audit report, they want to draw attention to responsibilities of management. Management is responsible for the presentation of the financial statements, so it's not the responsibility of the auditors to have the financial statements in a format or in a presentation that's not correct. It's management's responsibility to make sure that the financial statements are presented fairly, and it's management's responsibility to have those prepared. They also define what the auditor's responsibilities are throughout the audit. Their objectives are to obtain reasonable assurance, and that is a high level of assurance, but it's not absolute assurance. So even though they've audited the financial statements, it's not absolute assurance. So in performing the audit, they exercise professional judgment and maintain professional skepticism. They identify and assess risks of material misstatements. And they obtain an understanding that's appropriate for the circumstances, but it's not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the school's internal controls. They evaluate the appropriateness of our accounting policies. They evaluate the overall presentation of the consolidated financial statements. And then last item that they're responsible for is to conclude whether in their judgment there are conditions or events that could raise substantial doubt of the school's ability to continue. And so there is no going concern from that standpoint either. So again, it's a good audit. And lastly, they're required to communicate those charged with governance about the planned scope, the timing of the audit, significant audit findings, and certain internal controls that they identify. So just one thing to point out on this too is this audit is not an audit that they're specifically looking for fraud. A lot of times people think when an audit's being conducted that they're specifically looking for fraud. They're not looking for fraud in this kind of an audit. But if they find it, obviously they would report it and make sure that the board knows about it. The audit report also talks about the supplementary information. You can go back on a slide for just a moment. And so they also express an opinion on that. They say that that's presented for additional analysis, but it's not required for the consolidated financial statements. And the opinion that they have is that the supplementary information is fairly stated. So again, just it was a good audit report. Okay, so now talking about, staying on this slide here, excluding capital items and principal payments. When we're talking about the actual financial statements, we spent more than we received by $384,000, which shouldn't be a surprise to you. We talked about that in the August meeting, so nothing out of the ordinary there. if you compare it to those compiled set of financial statements that I presented in August, major difference there is for the audit, we consolidate the school with the real estate entity, so our SPE entity with the new market tax credit. So we had interest expense over there of $100,000. So if you were to compare the compiled set, which is just the school, to the audit, there's a little bit of a reconciliation difference there, but it's explainable. And if you look at the audit notes, pages 12 and 13 talk about the new market tax credit and the SPE entity. So if you wanted more information on that, you can read about it there. Talking about the statement of assets, liabilities, and net assets, total assets changed if we compare it from last year to this year by $800,000 decrease in assets. And what that is the cash. Our cash went down. If you go to the next slide for me, cash went down by $500,000. Again, that shouldn't be a surprise. We talked about that in August. From a cash in, cash out perspective, cash decreased by $500,000. And then we also, when you're looking at our assets, we have depreciation, and there was $300,000 there of change in our property and equipment. So other highlights. Go forward on my notes here. So the consolidated statements, it includes functional expenses, and that's just the categories. Essentially, it's broken down into categories: charter school, management, general, fundraising. So that's in the financial statements, if you're wondering about that. Going on to the notes, you can stay here on this page. Just talking about other highlights within the financial statements. So if you notice, once you get to, if you're looking at the financial statements within this audit report final, there's a footer there on the financial statements that say, see accompanying notes of the financial statements. And so the auditors are drawing your attention to notes, the notes of the financial statements. And that's on pages 7 through 14. And what that does is, I mean, it's aiding the reader of the financial statements, and it's providing context of those financial statements. So those are good to read over and look at as well. The auditors also want us to draw attention to the basis of accounting. We talked about that briefly at the beginning of this meeting here. I just want to kind of highlight that again. The basis of accounting refers to when revenues and expenditures are recognized in the accounts and reported on the financial statements. And so when our transactions, or excuse me, the basis of recognizing assets, liabilities, net assets, revenues, and expenses is when our cash transactions happen. So that's why it's considered a cash basis. It's when those transactions occur.
Stephen, can I ask
yes,
a quick question?
absolutely.
Is that every year? I mean, we're always
Yes.
reporting on the modified cash basis, so it's not an anomaly.
Not an anomaly. There's no change in our basis. We've
Okay.
been doing that year over year.
Okay. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you for stopping. And so, like I said, just wanted to draw your attention, since the auditors draw our attention there as well. Let's see. We talked about note L, note N. Let's see. So note N here at the bottom of our slide: liquidity and availability of financial assets. So our financial assets available to meet cash needs is $4.5 million at the end of June 2022. Just looking at our cash this last night, our repo account, which is the sweep account, it has $4.3 million in it. So we haven't had much change there, just looking at just one of those accounts that we have. So if we total up all our accounts, we'd have more than the 4.3, but just as a quick glance, we really haven't decreased too much in cash, even year to date over 6 months. Part of that's from that funding glitch as well. As noted, the findings, there were no findings. That's a good thing. Other audit sections. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's supplementary information that includes additional financial statements just presented with the school separate and real estate entity separated. So you can see just the school and the real estate entity if you're curious about how those different entities operate or how they shook out. And then we have the state compliance section. And so there's also a report that goes along with the state compliance section. And the auditors, they examine that set of financials as well. And they've examined our assertions of those compiled set. And so they base their opinions on what we've provided them. And they examine the school's records for attendance, average daily transportation, and other statutory requirements. And those are listed in the schedule of statistics. And that's also within the audit report final. Again, they draw your attention that it's management's responsibility. It's not the auditor's responsibility to put these together. But then they also do have a section about the auditor's responsibility, and their responsibility is to express an opinion on management's assertions. And so they believe that their examination provides a reasonable basis of their opinion. And so then they give an opinion on these state compliance, on the state compliance section. And so in their opinion, management's assertions that the school complied with the requirements, and they're fairly stated in all material aspects. So again, just a good audit there. For the state, there's no state findings, so that's a good thing. Moving on to the federal compliance section. They don't express an opinion on this section, but they do consider the internal controls that we have in place, but there is a limited purpose for examining the internal controls. And so it's not designed to identify all deficiencies in internal control, but given the limitations, they didn't identify any deficiencies in our internal controls that would consider a material weakness. So again, we had a good audit there. Any questions on the any of those sections that we've covered? Like I said, there's quite a bit to unpack here. With the federal section, there's also notes included with the federal section, so those are also good to review and look over, as well as the notes to the first section of financial statements. There's also some management letters that are sent out. If you look in that audit folder that I sent out, the management letter itself, that's to the board of directors and management that the auditors provide. And within that, they say that they've audited our consolidated financial statements. They also talk about there was a planned scope that they issued us an engagement letter, and part of that scope of the audit is included with that engagement letter. And so that's what they base their audit on, is what they issued back in October of the planned scope and the timing of the audit. Within that management letter, they talk about any difficulties encountered. And so they encountered no significant difficulties with management, which if there were difficulties with management or obtaining information, that would be an issue. I mean, if we were trying to hide stuff, that would be a problem, but they didn't have any difficulties with management. There was no different disagreements with management. So if they found something that was out of the ordinary, or if we wanted to report revenue in a certain way and we disagreed with them, they'd have to report on any disagreements. They had no disagreements with us or during the course of the audit. It also highlights that there's management representations, and there was a separate letter also within the packet of a management representation letter. And so management, that would be us, we make certain representations about the financial statements, that we've provided all necessary information to the auditors. And so it talks about that they've requested certain representations. And again, it's a lot of the responsibility falls on us. It's not the auditor's responsibility. And also within that management letter talks about restricted use. So there is restricted use of the audit, but banks and donors fit into that restriction. So on that. Two more things here. There is a communication of no material weakness letter within the audit packet. In planning for the audit, they consider the school's internal controls, but they don't express an opinion on the effectiveness on the internal controls, but they did not identify any material weakness. So it just goes right along with that federal section. And last item is the newspaper release. So there is a newspaper release that has to be issued. And so they have a letter that goes with that. And that's pretty much a summarization of their audit report, very summarized. It's just a one-page one-page letter, excuse me. And it just talks about, in their opinion, the financial statements are presented fairly. But they can, if a reader wants to see the full set, they can see the full set in my office. So next slide for me. Just wanted to talk about fund balance and reserve ratio. So this is a 5-year looking backward, starting with 2018, going to 2022. Fund balance has increased. And along with that, the reserve ratio has also increased. And typically 25% is a good reserve ratio, because that's, a quarter of the year. So 3 months of expenses is what we can cover with our reserve. If you go to the next slide, you can see it as a 10-year. So it's, if you were to throw a line on that, we're on an upward trend. What we're on is a 10-year. We've had a little bit of a dip over the last 3 years, but part of that was we received PPP money, which helped us out quite a bit. That really jumped our reserve, and we had to eat into our reserves last year, is why there was a little bit of a trend down. But we're still above a 25% reserve ratio, so we're still on a good trend there. Next slide. So like I said, there was a lot to unpack there. Does anyone have any additional questions? Thank you, Michelle, for asking a question there while we were talking through it.
The only thing I was curious about is, do we need this posted somewhere on our website as soon as it's readily available? Like, what do we need to do to make sure we follow whatever regulations we need to on that end?
So I will upload a copy to DESE's portal. There's a global portal that they use, and so I will put a copy out there. They also require signed meeting minutes of the approval. That's not due tomorrow, but as soon as we can get it up there, that'd be good. But the actual audit is due, needs to be uploaded by tomorrow.
Got it. So if we approve, I know Michelle is taking minutes for today's meeting, but they won't get approved until our next board meeting. That timeline is okay?
That's as far as I understand it, that's correct.
Okay.
And who signs the minutes?
That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. I'll follow up with you on that, Michelle.
Okay.
Michael, I know from the sort of financial committee, you typically have the best read of things, anything that stands out to you that we should be questioning about.
No, not at this time.
Okay. It looked very clean from what I can tell.
All right, can we have a motion to approve the 21-22 audit?
So move this, Mike.
We have a second.
Second, Marvin.
Marvin, right? Thank you. Any discussion?
Yep.
Everyone in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries.
Very good. Thank you again so much for your time today, and thank you all for your continued service. Appreciate you all.
So for the vote, Beth, shouldn't you call people name by name?
Oh, do we need a roll? It's not closed session, so I don't know that we need a roll call vote, but is it helpful to? I think just a normal vote is all right, since there's nobody opposed.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. Any other final thoughts or questions? No. I appreciate everybody's time this morning, and Stephen, as I mentioned at the beginning, all of the time that you had to put into this over break as well. So yeah, happy to get that in by the deadline.
Yes, thank you.
All right. I think we are good. I hope everybody enjoyed